Alright, it's that time again. With the new season release, it's time for the updated version of the complete jungle guide. This is going to cover everything you need to know from the very basics to gods, builds, and some advanced tips to up your game in jungle. If you do find yourself enjoying or learning something from this, then be sure to subscribe and check out the other roles. I've covered solo lane already, but duo lane and mid lane are coming shortly afterwards as well, so if you don't want to miss those, then be sure to subscribe. It also helps us to get to that 20k mark too. Alright, so let's get into this with the contents of exactly what I'm going to be covering in the guide. There will be timestamps on screen and in a pinned comment if you want to skip to certain sections. First up, the basics of what jungle is about. After that, I'll go into the jungle's layout and important areas of the jungle to pay attention to, what buffs you need to be getting, all that kind of stuff. Then gods and items, where I'll discuss what types of gods you should be bringing to the jungle and how to build them. After that, farming effectively, jungle pathing, and playing efficiently. Then the second half of being a jungler, ganking, how to gank effectively and when to gank, stuff like that. And finally, we'll close out the guide with a little bit on team fighting and team play as a typical jungle god. Alright, so let's kick this one off with the basics of the jungle role. So the jungler by nature plays very differently to other roles. They have no specific lane to cover and farm, but they get their XP and gold and do most of their business within the depths of the jungle. Given they have no specific lane, junglers will roam the jungle looking to pick off unsuspecting targets and gank other lanes to help out their teammates. They'll be farming the jungle camps and buffs located within the jungle, more on those later, to get a lead so when they do gank lanes they have a good chance of landing kills and getting their team ahead. In that way, the jungle probably has the largest influence on the game of any role, especially early on. Some key skills for a jungler to have would be efficient farming at all times, being able to manage a lot of different events happening at once and pick what's most important for you, ability to play assassins well of course, and being able to gank lanes and do effective rotations. And if you don't have all these skills available to you immediately, hopefully the rest of this video will help you out in that regard. Alright, so with the basics done, let's move into the jungle's layout and what is located there. So for those new to Conquest, the jungle is defined as any area between the three lanes, so it's split into two sides down the middle and is home to many different XP camps and jungle buffs that are crucial to your team's success, along with some larger objectives in the Gold Fury, Pyromancer and Fire Giant. So the first and most important buff to you as a jungler is your speed buff. Located at the back of the map here, this buff does what it says on the tin, gives you extra movement speed. This helps you maneuver around the jungle more efficiently and chase down those kills a little bit better. Moving a little ways over, still on this side of the map, to the solo lane we have the blue buff. This gives extra mana regen and cooldown reduction and goes to the solo laner. Across the way near mid lane we have the red buff, giving extra damage to the wearer. This usually goes to the mid laner, but sometimes goes to the ADC as well, it really depends on who needs it most. And finally for the buffs, the purple buff, which gives an aura that reduces enemy protections to the wielder. And this one usually goes to support or sometimes to the ADC as well. Alright, so that's all the buffs within the jungle, but what about the rest of these camps? Well, those are just standard XP and gold camps. They don't give any additional benefit, but are there to help you keep up in farm with the rest of the laners. The two sets of back camps, here and here, and then the two sets of mid camps, here and here, which are often in contention with the enemy team as they are in a neutral position in the middle of the map and there's a lot of fighting over them. And one final thing of note, over by the solo lane we have the Totem of Coup. This is a passive objective that won't attack you back and gives extra mana regen and movement speed to your entire team when taken, and also empowers your towers, giving that effect to people who stand in them. You can rotate as a jungler to secure this, but usually you're better off farming elsewhere and letting solo lane take care of this one. And of course, the Conquest map is mirrored, so all the stuff you find on your side of the map is in the exact same spot on the enemy side of the map too. Okay, so with the jungle's layout covered, let's move on to the gods and items section. So as for gods you'll be wanting to pick in the jungle role, you can't really go wrong with any assassin in jungle. It's the role they were designed for. Some are better than others of course, but all will work decently. A few notable mages work well in the jungle as well, the best ones being Hebo, Aokwang and Chang'e. Some warriors can do okay as well, such as Erlang Shen, Achilles, Odin or Cuchulainn. And a few guardians work, though not quite as well as these other picks, most notably Cabrakan, Athena and Artio. Hunters can work in some scenarios in jungle, but in general, no hunters see reliable enough play in the jungle for me to list any of them here. Okay, so with gods covered, how do you build these gods? So for this section, I'm only going to be covering builds for assassins. Unfortunately, it would take way too long to cover 4 separate sets of items each for different classes that are viable in jungle. If you're playing a non-assassin pick, you should look up a build elsewhere. Alright, so in terms of starting builds for the jungle, you need Assassin's Blessing always. This item gives you extra damage against jungle camps and allows you to clear much faster, and also gives you extra health and mana sustain when killing camps. Plus that nice 10 penetration once you do evolve it from killing 50 jungle monsters. With the rest of your gold, you usually want to grab the start of an item you want early. So if you want to build the Crusher early on, get a tier 1 mace. If you want to rush Haste and Katana early, get a tier 1 Katana, that kind of stuff. Then spend any remaining gold you have on potions for sustain in the early game. So from there, unless you're Ratatoskr, you need your boots. Which boots you get is dependent on your god, but most ability-based assassins like Serket, Thor, Hunbats, or Pele will want Warrior Tabi. Of course, you need movement speed as a jungler to get around, but the 40 physical power on these as well is super strong for those ability-based gods. So after your boots are done, you want to finish that tier 1 item you started in your starting build into a full item. And keep note that you finish this full item after you bought your full boots. Early items I like for this second slot are the Crusher, Hasten Katana on certain gods like Kali, Mercury or Bakasura, but don't build this on gods like Thor for example. Jotun's Wrath is okay as well, and even Heartseeker is alright, but I do prefer other options. Just pick whatever item you like to build second and start it up early, and then finish it now. After that, your build can usually go in a million different directions based on the god you're playing and the game you're in, so I'll just list a few good items that I like on most assassins here and you can pick from them. So Crusher, Heartseeker, Hasten Katana and Jotun's Wrath from before still apply. Then there's Brawler's Beatstick as your go-to anti-heal option as an assassin. Transcendence can be good if you're ahead on an ability-based assassin and can get those stacks easily. Hydra's Lament is great on ability-based assassins that can weave in auto-attacks between abilities, well, like Susanoo or Nemesis for example. Stone-Cutting Sword is great for certain auto-attack focused gods. And for very auto-attack heavy gods like Kali or Bakasura, you will often want Executioner and Kinsize in your builds as well. And for a little bit of defense, Void Shield is a nice hybrid item that gives decent damage and some penetration, but also some nice defense and health as well. And you can also look at Mantle of Discord for a more pure defensive option as you get later into the game if you need it. In terms of relics, for most assassin junglers you're looking at Beads and Blink right now, but Aegis is also an option if you feel you need it for the defensive capabilities. I'll just quickly throw up a few builds for ability-based assassins and then auto-attack based assassins like Kali, Mercury and Bakasura here if you want to just have some full build examples. Alright, so with items covered, let's move on to farming, pathing and efficient play. So jungle by nature has the most amount of things to keep track of and do at any one time. This can often make people forget about their farming and how to play efficiently when they transition from a laning role into the jungle. Given all of the roles get fed minions every 30 seconds, it's relatively easy to know what you're doing in terms of keeping up in farm, but as a jungler it's easy to fall behind if you don't focus a bit on farm. But of course you do need to balance that with the other jobs you have as a jungler. Playing efficiently basically just boils down to never wasting time, or avoiding doing so as much as possible. Any time you waste standing in a lane just leeching or recalling for no real reason or taking bad pathing to camps is time you could have spent getting extra farm, ganking a lane, buying an item, anything like that really. This is especially important in the early game as every level from 1 to 5 is a huge deal and being one level down to the enemy jungler will probably result in you being unable to fight them. But if you play efficiently in the early game, those few seconds you save here and there and that extra camp you took as a result of that could mean you're the one who's a level up and you can really push out the enemy jungler because of that. I'll also mention invades in this section. Invading, basically taking enemy jungle camps for yourself, is a very high risk but high reward strategy. Since of course you're going deep into enemy territory and could easily be rotated on by their team, but if you do manage to invade a camp and get out safely, it's a huge boost for you. Since taking an enemy camp is basically worth double what taking your own camp is, because you get that XP and gold and you also take that farm away from the enemy at the same time. Invades should really only be done when you know you can either get out safely or take a fight should people rotate on you. And ideally you should have good ward coverage as well to spot out these enemy rotations before they get too close. And quickly before we move on from farming and pathing, I'll just mention where and how to start the game as a jungler since many new players get lost with where to even start the game because of course you have no lane to start in. So as of recording, but keep in mind this might change by the time you watch this, the jungle starts at their speed buff, clears that usually with the help of the mid laner, then clears back camps, then moves to solo lane blue buff, clears that which gives you level 2, and then usually you'll want to head to mid lane and contest mid camps, get red buff or whatever else you want to do from that point on. Alright, so we've covered farming, now let's cover the second pillar of the jungle role, ganking and rotations. So ganking is of course extremely important as a jungler. Since you have no lane to cover, you'll be roaming the jungle looking for opportunities to gank enemy laners to get your team ahead. When and where to gank is extremely situational, and I can't just tell you exactly when you should gank unfortunately. It comes with experience in the jungle and analysing the current game. Experience in other laning roles does come into play here though, since often you'll know when you want a gank as a laner. Try to get inside your teammates' heads and think, would I need a gank right now if that was me, and try to act accordingly. But as I said, knowing exactly when to act is very situational. Oftentimes there will be multiple places you're needed, but you have to evaluate and choose the best place that either needs you the most or has the best chance of a successful gank. How often and early you gank is also very dependent on your god and your team comp as a whole. If you're a very dominant early game pick like Thanatos, you'll want to gank early and often to abuse your high damage in comparison to other gods in the early game, and give yourself a lead going into the mid and late game phases where Thanatos is a bit weaker. But if you're Kali, for example, you're looking for that late game anyway, and will probably want to focus a bit more on farming early on, while keeping your eyes peeled for some easy gank attempts, but not forcing it too much. I see a lot of junglers trying to gank a solo laner that's like 2 levels up on them and already has a defense item online, and they either fail and just waste their time, or sometimes even get 1v2'd by the enemy fed solo, when they could have just gone for a ganking duo and just got them fed instead to deal with the enemy solo once the team fights start happening. It's also worth a note that just because a gank didn't directly result in a kill doesn't mean it was a failure and a complete waste of time. Sure, it would have been better to land the kill probably, but oftentimes you'll force enemies to recall at awkward times and miss farm, force their relic cooldowns, making them an easy kill target later on, or even just allow your teammates to clean them up later on in the lane. In terms of responding to enemy ganks, I see a lot of junglers that aren't confident in the role that simply hound the enemy jungler following every rotation they make but being just a bit behind. This is a really bad trap to fall into, so if you see yourself doing this, try to break out of it. Sometimes the enemy jungler is just one step ahead of you, and it's better to maybe like counter gank mid lane if they go to gank your duo, rather than trying to follow them and just being late to the rotation and not being able to do anything about it anyway. Despite what a lot of people will say, you don't need to follow every rotation the enemy makes like a sheep. Try to be proactive and dictate your own plays and have the enemy be the sheep rather than vice versa. And one final note on ganking. Oftentimes enemies will have wards, and so if you want to land an effective gank, you'll need to learn common ward spots for each lane and either avoid them or ideally sentry ward them so they'll never see your gank coming. Gods with semi-global ultimates such as Ratatoska, Thor, or Mercury can often dodge wards using these ultimates as well. Okay, so let's round off this guy with a bit on team fighting and team play as a jungler. So right off the bat, I'm going to be approaching this section assuming you're an assassin for the jungle. There are too many different viable picks to cover individually, and a guardian jungle is going to play very differently to an assassin jungle, for example. But as that typical assassin in jungle, your job in teamfights is usually diving the enemy backline and getting out safely. Most assassins will like to all in a target, hopefully get the kill, then back off and wait for cooldown resets to go back in and do it all again. Unlike warriors who also like to dive the backline, assassins can't stay there for too long without being nuked or CC'd to death. You need to use your mobility to get in and out quickly and do as much damage as you can and cause as much chaos as you can while you're in there. The more attention you draw to yourself while you're diving, the less attention the enemies are paying to your own carry gods, which creates space for them to wreak havoc. Keep an eye out for enemies that are out of position in teamfights as well. Often with your high mobility on an assassin, you can easily get in and pick someone off very well who steps out of position and not get punished for it because you can easily get away. And if you land a successful pick before the fight even starts, it should be a pretty easy one for your team. Alright, so that's all I've got for the complete jungle guide for Season 6. As always, if you have any other questions, be sure to leave them below and either me or some other filthy jungle main will get back to you. Subscribe and turn those notifications on so you can be the first to watch all the other role guides coming soon, and as always, have a great day and peace out nerds.